Thristan, welcome to our masterclass, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing your projects and for your time and for sharing all this information with us. And hopefully we're gonna have a heated discussion at the end with the questions and see what people think of propaganda posters and marketing in general. So Thristan did a master course with us, master in design. She's a graphic designer, and she's from Jamaica. And apparently, it's not sunny there right now. It's been raining.
That's right. It's been raining all day, and it's about to rain now.
And mic drop. I'll let you start, Thristan, if you like.
No problem. Thank you everyone for coming. So the topic of my thesis for the Masters in Design was the power of the poster. Is 21st century graphic design the spread of propaganda or simply just modern day advertising? So some of the things that prompted me to want to discuss this topic is the fact that I recognize that design has constantly evolved and that consumers really no longer interpret or view the information that's presented to them in the same way. And one of those reasons is because of the fact that people really have more access to information and technology. So we have information and technology at our fingertips. So we have TikTok and YouTube, and people are basically using those to do things like even go to school. So it also came about from particularly COVID, really. So having lived through that pandemic and just seeing how all that influx of information, people telling you about the virus, how it can be cured and all that sort of stuff really had me delve into see that all the information that was presented, people take it however they wish. And I really understood that there was a sort of change in design. So I really wanted to understand what exactly has changed in design. And I specifically delved into studying poster design because posters have been around for ages and they have been one of the largest forms of disseminating information. So I really wanted to delve into what exactly has changed in poster designs and how they're presented to the public. And I realized that having all that information at our fingertips, we have two terms that people generally understand, and that's propaganda and advertising. And people tend to look at propaganda necessarily as being bad and advertising as being a sort of a good thing. But having seen that evolution of design and the evolution of technology and access to information, there has been a sort of blur as to what is propaganda and what is advertising. And I decided to use printed posters as a sort of way to really understand the two and to really determine if there really is a difference and how can we tell that sort of difference in posters specifically. So some of the objectives of my research was that I really wanted, as I mentioned before, I really wanted to investigate what are the visual approaches that corporations, specifically in the US, took on when they were designing those posters, and why did they make those sort of decisions? So I focused specifically on two areas. So I focused two eras, the 1940s and the 2010s. So I chose the 1940s mainly because it was around World War, and posters were the heaviest means of disseminating information, really the only means. And then I chose a more modern era, which would have been the 2010s. And those gave rise to a lot of movements such as the Black Lives Matter, which posters were coming out of heavily, and campaigns such as Obama's presidency to really delve in and investigate what visual approaches were used. So in picking those eras, in order to really differentiate what is considered propaganda and advertising is in this 21st century, I compared and contrast the two eras, and I'll get into the visual techniques specifically that I delved into. And then the applied portion of the project really came into me taking all that I studied from both eras and then applying them to a more modern approach to specifically those 1940s. And that would have really helped me to determine, is there sort of a difference between the two terms? So my general project took on that comparative framework that I mentioned earlier. So I looked at 1940s posters that were considered propaganda and 1940s advertising posters, as well as 2010 posters that were considered to be propaganda and 2010 posters that were considered to be advertising. And I looked at these 5 specific visual techniques under all 4 spectrums. So we looked at typography, how imagery was used, how language was used, color, and appeal. And specifically on the appeal, I decided to look into gender roles and inequality. So in the 1940s, these were some of the advertising posters back then. So we have everything ranging from Nestle to donuts to Coca-Cola to cigarettes that were disseminated to the public. Propaganda posters generally in that period had one idea, and that was really centered around all things related to the war. And you can see that here. So I'll give you a bit of a minute to digest some of these posters. And now moving on to the 2010s, these were some of what the advertising posters looked like. So here we have an ad from Colgate, and then Precision Parking by Volkswagen, as well as Coca-Cola, as well as what was considered to be some propaganda posters during that time as well. So we have Obama's presidency campaign, 2 specific posters from the Professional Association of Design, as well as a nonprofit organization called We the Women. These are some of what the posters in the 2010s really looked like for both spectrums. So going on to developing the project, really, I decided to take 10 posters from the 1940s and redesign them in a more contemporary and modern approach. So having studied both eras, having studied all the visual techniques, typography, use of language, use of color under all the spectrums that were mentioned before, the redesigning these posters was really aimed at creating that discernible difference between advertising and propaganda. So taking into consideration some of how the 2010s posters were designed, some of the things that came out specifically was how inclusive these posters became. So as the period progressed and we moved into that more modern era, the design and those printed posters became more inclusive. So you saw more varying ethnicities and races that came out through the posters. You saw designers using more abstract representation of certain thoughts and ideas, and you saw a sort of shift in gender roles. So whereas the 1940s posters were more of telling you how to think, the more modern posters into that 2010 era sort of give you a showing or gave you an idea of how you could possibly think without really telling you, this is what we're pushing. This is the belief, this is the idea that we're pushing. And then in order to test all of this, I decided to do a focus group. So my focus group consisted of 2 groups. And each of those 2 groups had 15 participants. So, and they were all between the ages of 22 to 55. So group 1 really consisted of members of the design discipline. So there were people that were working in the field of design or anything design related. And then group 2 was just the general public. And these were people who had maybe a little bit of knowledge in design. They know what looks good and what doesn't look good, or they had absolutely no knowledge of design. And really what the participants were asked to do was that they were given 2 categories. So they were given propaganda and advertising categories. And they were given the entire image bank of posters that I had studied throughout the entire project, some of which I had shown you before, as well as those poster redesigns. So they were given all those posters randomized. They weren't told which posters were considered advertising and propaganda or which were the redesigns. And all they had to do was, based on their understanding of what propaganda looked like or what they understood it to be and what advertising was to them, they were to simply place those posters under those categories. Sounded easy enough. And it did spark a very interesting conversation. So these were generally what the focus group looked like after having gone through all the posters. So in group 1, which was the members of the design discipline, you could see that the propaganda had more posters on that side versus advertising, and vice versa for group 2. So I'll take you through some of what the redesigns of the posters look like. So as I mentioned, that I redesigned the 1940s posters from both spectrums into a more contemporary, more modern form to really just get an idea of, if we were to design these same posters from back then, having gathered all the information, having understood how that more modern approach to design looks like, how they've used typography, how they've used imagery and color and all of those visual techniques in that more modern sense, and redesign these 1940s posters. This is a general idea of what they would look like, having understood how they approached it. So in the 1940s, you could see how imagery was a big part. Text was also generally much larger than it is in more modern designs. So text moved from being very big to very small, or really no text at all. And then you can see that sort of abstract representation coming out. So instead of using the image of really a nurse in that redesign, there is that more abstract representation of a nurse, which is more gender neutral in a sense, because both men and women can be nurses. And even in the background of the image, you can see that there is a male nurse, sort of highlighting that shift that came about in the more modern designs. As it relates to the second pair, where food is a weapon, you can see the redesign taking on that once again abstract approach by using literal food and mimicking that sort of that weapon, which it really mimics that dynamite, piece of weaponry that was used in the time period. As for the first pair here, as I mentioned, that posters back in the 1940s sort of told you how to think and told you how to feel, versus the more modern approach played on that sort of appeal to your emotions, really. Rather than telling you to defend American freedom, the redesign sort of asks you what you stand for. So giving you that sort of leeway to really make you feel as though you are drawing your own conclusions or drawing your own thought processes and ideas. The Doughboy Donuts redesign does also take on that sort of abstract representation using an abstract version of a man, and then using the donut as sort of a representation of that muscle, highlighting how the Doughboy Donuts are really that health defense that was really pushed in that ad. This first set is particularly my favorite. It's really a highlighting of how we operate as a society today. So we operate using our phones or tablets or computers, and that was really the direction as it related to the redesign. So in the 1940s, it's really straightforward, use of imagery, use of large text. And then as you can see with the redesign, the text comes down a bit more smaller. And while the redesign doesn't necessarily sort of use that abstract representation, it mimics the sort of ideology and the way in which that people today are really living, with the use of phones and technology just being used as that watching thing. As for the final set, you can see that shift in gender roles that comes about in that more modern approach to design. So in the 1940s, we have "I'm proud my husband wants me to do my part," versus the more modern approach taking on a more personal standpoint. So we have the 1940s where it's sort of the man telling the woman how to think and how to operate, versus that more modern approach where the woman is thinking for herself. And you can see that sort of switch where women are stepping into that more male-eccentric, or what was thought to be more male-eccentric roles. And those were some of the really big ideas or big results that came from the general project. So in essence, the entire project, it can be said that graphic design of today subtly makes use of some propaganda techniques. But in asking the question, can 21st century design really be said to spread propaganda? We really can't give a resounding yes. And that's very much due to how design today is presented. So because of that sort of abstract representation, the abstract nature of how design has taken, and we can't really 100% say that, yes, graphic design today spreads propaganda, because the nature of propaganda was generally hard and fast, in your face, telling you what to think. But because designers today generally allow people to really draw their own conclusions by relating those abstract ideas to sort of human experiences, we can't exactly give a resounding yes. So as I mentioned, or as you would have seen previously, specifically relating to that Colgate ad, that Colgate floss ad with the kiwi and the seeds, designers of the 21st century do tend to take on a sort of non-linear approach when it comes to designing. So in order to really not get cancelled per se, and to not have the masses really have people saying that, oh, you are telling people to think this. They're really encouraging a particular synthesis or a particular perception. They've taken on that abstract approach and that non-linear approach to design. And I'll use the Colgate ad as sort of an example to explain what I mean by that non-linear approach. So Colgate, that particular ad was discussing floss. So floss is what they were really promoting in that ad. But on that spectrum, whenever we think of floss, we tend to think of teeth. Teeth is more directly related to that experience of using floss. But the designers taking that sort of abstract approach and relating it to the human experience of flossing your teeth by using a kiwi, a fruit with such tiny seeds that generally get stuck in your teeth, and then just using that as sort of the forefront and the high focal point of design just really allows for the design to be more memorable, taking on that nonlinear approach. So while teeth may have been more closer to floss, them using something a lot more farther away really does make that design more memorable and really highlights that sort of abstract approach that they take on. And overall, that more modern approach to those visual techniques, as I mentioned, you can see typography becoming a lot smaller or not even being used at all in designs. Imagery, as I mentioned, taking on that abstract approach, and then color and imagery really maintaining that high focal point throughout both spectrums. So imagery and color was really something that maintained throughout those eras. But all in all, it goes to say that the way in which that design is approached today, we can't really say that 21st century design is really spreading propaganda. All in all, corporations are generally always trying to push their own agenda, but how subtly that it is approached today it can't really be said that design does spread a propaganda. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so we haven't received any questions yet. Thank you so much for the presentation. Some posters really kind of got me like, I want to ask a question now. You know, because you can just so tell like the difference between what they used in the past. They kind of touched very, very sensitive subjects that were really real, like it's real life, real connection to people. And it was just the simple people, the real communities. And then I think now we kind of shifted away. And it's almost, I feel, it's because of the disconnection that the communities are going through. We're losing that sense. We are missing these points, I think, in marketing. We are not understanding really what is the sensitive area in this community or in this culture or in this field. Like, you know, they were using nurses and targeting women and almost awarding that person with a crown,
right,
to kind of celebrate the sacrifice and to, you know, encourage, use very, very sensitive subjects that were related to culture and beliefs and religions and you know, everything that just touches the soul.
And then, go ahead.
And then now I feel like we are more technical. We're becoming more digital. We're becoming more far away from these, you know, sensitive connections. I think we do have a question.
To comment on your point, though, I really think that right now I think we are becoming sensitive, even more so sensitive. Some people would argue that we're becoming too sensitive, and that would really have highlighted why it is that designers took the approach that they took. So I know in this day and age we have something called cancel culture, and because people have all this information, anything that doesn't make the slightest of sense or seems the slightest foggy or can be misconstrued in any way, people can literally just go and take up their phones and search anything and really destroy whole corporations in 2 sentences. So I really think that having recognized that sort of thing was really why it is that sort of shift came about. So in order to avoid that sort of cancel culture, really to avoid corporations failing at the hands of their consumers, taking on that sort of abstract representation, really giving people only this amount of information, and then saying, here, I'm presenting this to you, really take it how you feel the need to take it. I'm giving you just enough to make my point, just enough, but not enough to say that I am facilitating this particular synthesis, or I am telling you exactly how to feel. So whereas 1940s posters were sort of in your face and telling you exactly you should think this, 21st century design gives you a sort of leeway in saying, here you go, you may think this or you may not think this. So it's more, let's say it's a little bit more timid, if you will.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, it's true. People have seen and heard more than they have in the past, and they have more access to what they had in these days. But
Right.
I agree, I totally agree. And then you have like the health and safety, and you have like the lawsuits, and you have you have the people that could argue any poster that is misleading or too convincing or too personal, or so it's like the Red Bull ad where it gives you wings, so it had to be wings.
And
So
you
yeah,
have people that will literally take that sort of idea very literally.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that design in this day and age tends to be sort of careful about.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, it's a very sensitive kind of subject, and there's this very, very thin line, between a mistake and an ad.
Right.
Yeah, it's so true. I don't think I actually have questions, but I just have people that are very, very happy and thankful for you, like for sharing this presentation and these ideas and these posters. But I do have a question. Like, what do you think of the posters that were used for the COVID vaccine? They were very, very sensitive.
They were very sensitive.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think at some point, if whatever was gonna come out in the next few years about the vaccine, I really believe that some of these posters will be sued.
Possibly, because even going around and people incentivizing, I've seen posters where people get incentivized in order to take the vaccine, and those were sort of very touchy topics to sort of to delve into, because you're really like I mentioned, encouraging that sort of
trying to convince.
Right. So I saw them and I thought, I'm not really sure if this may have been the best approach, but
like one of them was a pregnant lady inside a bubble.
Right, right.
I'm
Those,
like,
those things were very
I,
touchy
yeah,
topics to
very
discuss.
strong.
Very strong, yes.
Yes, yes,
And the just the very nature of how sensitive they can be could even have led people to think you are propagating this specific idea. Whereas corporations may entirely just think of it as something I'm just trying to share
promote.
sort of information with you, and
Mm,
people may generally take it on a whole different level. So that's sort of where you see that blur come in, because you can really see how people have psychologically developed, and that development of our minds just really leads designers to sort of be a little bit wary about what it is that they're creating and what it is that they're pushing out to the public.
yeah, yeah, so true. But I would like to end our questions by
Mhm.
saying, let's not remember that posters could be used in a very, very good way. So inspiring posters, motivating
Mhm.
posters, educating posters, and there are all sorts of posters that could actually benefit many, many communities and bring people together and share ideas and, you know, inspire lots of like
Right.
young generation and like different majors and
Mhm.
different sections in the work environment. So yes, they could be, they are very dangerous,
Mhm.
but they could be dangerous in both ways, in a good way and in a bad way. So yeah, so
Right.
yes, well done for the work that people do. I think like design, like I said when we first got into the call, is one of the
Yeah.
very, like, I would love to become, or I would, now maybe it's a bit too late for me to become a designer. Maybe I would like to be able to delegate this
Mhm.
position to somebody else who is already an
Mhm.
experienced designer. But if there is anything in life, I actually, not many things that I do regret, but it's like not studying
Mhm.
architecture or design for university for my major studies. So I can't go back in time, but I can delegate to good designers, hopefully in the future. And
Right.
London School of Design and Marketing is doing that for me.
Right.
We're making many designers and many marketees in the
That's right.
world, so it's good. If no one has a question or comment that they would like to unmute and share with us, then we can end this meeting. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us. And Lynn and Ekin, you are very, very welcome. It's been a very, very good experience. And thanks to Thristan, she made it really fun and it was really quick. I didn't even feel that it's been 40 minutes already.
Thank you for
So it's
having
very
me.
well presented and a really, really good sensitive subject that we should all kind of always talk about
Mhm.
and discuss between us.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely. No, thank you for joining us, and so, so lovely to meet you.
You as well.
Hopefully one day we'll visit Jamaica on a sunny day.
Hopefully.
And we will probably meet in person for sure.
Will do.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank
Have a good
you.
evening. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.